You know, it's funny the things you inherit. Some guys get a watch from their grandfather, a classic car, maybe a portfolio of stocks if they're lucky. Me? I inherited a ghost story. A famous one, at that. My last name is Bell. And yes, I'm related to that Bell family. The one from Adams, Tennessee. The one that was tormented by something that called itself Kate, but that the world would come to know as the Bell Witch. For most of my life, it was just an embarrassing piece of family trivia. A weird story that would come up at holidays. Usually told by my grandfather. His eyes wide over a glass of whiskey. I'd roll my eyes and tune it out. I was a practical person. I lived in Chicago. Worked as a civil engineer designing bridges. I dealt in concrete, steel, and quantifiable stress loads. Specters and goblins weren't part of my equations. To me, the Bell Witch was just a campfire story that got out of hand. A piece of folklore that my ancestors, for whatever reason, were at the center of. A story that, unfortunately, followed our family name around like a stray dog. This all changed in the late autumn of 2023. When my grandfather, Thomas Bell, passed away. He was the last of the old guard in our family. The one who stayed close to the ancestral home in Tennessee. He was 88, lived a full life, and his passing, while sad, wasn't a tragedy. The tragedy, for me, came a week later in the form of a package from his lawyer. Inside was a heavy, leather-bound book and a handwritten letter. The book wasn't a book in the traditional sense, it was a journal. The leather was dark, almost black, and cracked with age, the kind of deep fissures you see in drought-stricken earth. It was held shut by a simple leather tie. The letter was from my grandfather. His handwriting, usually so strong and steady, was a shaky scrawl. "Jake," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. There are things to settle with the estate. The lawyers will handle that. But this is for you. You're the last of our direct line with the Bell name. I know you never put much stock in the old stories. I don't blame you. It's better that way. But you need to have this. It was my father's, and his father's before him. Passed down from John Bell Jr., the son of the man at the center of it all. This is the real record. Not the sensationalized books or the tourist trap tales. This is the truth of what happened in that house. Don't let it out of the family. And son, for God's sake, don't read it on the farm. Don't even take it to Adams. Some doors are best left unopened. Burn it if you have to. Maybe you should burn it. I think I was too much of a coward to do it myself. Be safe, Gramps." Honestly, my first reaction was a mix of pity and annoyance. My poor grandfather, getting lost in these old superstitions in his final years. Don't read it on the farm. It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. Still, it was his last wish. And my curiosity, the engineer's curiosity that wants to understand how things work, was piqued. The farm, the original plot of land, was now part of the estate I had to help settle. It had been leased out to local farmers for decades. But a small patch of it, where the original cabin once stood and a dilapidated 1920s farmhouse now sat empty, was still ours. I had to go down there anyway to meet with the estate agent and sign some papers. So, I did exactly what my grandfather told me not to do. I packed the journal, got in my car, and started the 9-hour drive from the concrete canyons of Chicago to the rolling green hills of Robertson County, Tennessee. I told myself it was for convenience. Why make 2 trips? I told myself I was just being efficient. But deep down, a part of me, the part one usually keep locked away, wanted to see. I wanted to stand on that patch of dirt, hold that journal in my hand, and prove, once and for all, that it was all just a story. The drive down was completely, utterly normal. I listened to a podcast about urban planning for the first few hours. Then switched to a classic rock station as I crossed into Kentucky. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air, as I got further south, started to smell different. It lost the sharp, industrial tang of the city and took on the rich, loamy scent of farmland. It was peaceful. I remember thinking, how could anything bad happen in a place that feels this calm? I arrived in Adams in the late afternoon. It's not a big place. It's the kind of town where everyone knows everyone else's business, where the highest building is the church steeple, and where time seems to flow a bit slower. I checked into a small, Clean motel off the main highway. The only one in town. The woman at the front desk. A pleasant lady with a kind face and a name tag that read, Darlene. Saw the name on my credit card. Belle, she said, her smile tightening just a fraction. Any relation to the old family? Distantly. I lied, forcing a casual smile. Just in town on business. She nodded, but her eyes held a flicker of something else. Pity? Fear? I couldn't tell. Well, you have a nice evening, Mr. Bell. The farmhouse is a few miles down Red River Road. Can't miss it. Big oak tree out front. The one that was struck by lightning years back. That night, in my sterile, anonymous motel room, I couldn't sleep. The air conditioning unit hummed a discordant tune. Every time a car passed on the highway, its headlights would sweep across the thin curtains, painting fleeting, ghostly shapes on the wall. Against my better judgment, and against my grandfather's dying wish, I untied the leather strap on the journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded from black to a rusty brown. The handwriting was archaic, full of elegant loops and sharp angles. It was the journal of John Bell Jr., who was a young man when the trouble, as he called it, began. I read for hours, completely engrossed. This wasn't like the sanitized versions of the story I'd heard. This was raw. It was filled with confusion, frustration, and a deep, permeating fear. He wrote about the first sounds, a faint knocking on the outside walls, a scratching sound like a dog clawing at the door, only there was no dog. He wrote about how his father, John Bell Sr., would grab his rifle and circle the house, finding nothing, no tracks, no person, nothing. He wrote about how they tried to dismiss it, blaming it on traveling pranksters or the wind. Then came the sounds from inside. The sound of furniture being dragged across the floor in the empty room upstairs. The sound of a bedpost being gnawed on. The sound of someone choking or strangling. A horrible, gurgling noise that would emanate from the dark corners of the cabin. The entry that truly unsettled me. That made me close the book and turn on every light in the motel room. Described the first time the entity targeted his younger sister. Betsy, he wrote. Betsy awoke with a scream that curdled the blood. Mother and I rushed to her side. Her face was pale as milk in the candlelight. Her eyes wide with a terror I pray I never see again. Her cheek was bright red. A perfect handprint welted upon her skin, as if she had been struck with great force. But we were all in the room. No one had entered. Then we heard it, a whisper, from the foot of her bed, as faint as a breeze through the keyhole. It was a high, thin sound, and all it said was, mine. I slammed the journal shut. A cold dread, heavy and real, settled in my stomach. Mine. The word seemed to hang in the stale air of the motel room. I told myself it was just the power of suggestion. It was a 200-year-old story. It had nothing to do with me. I was just here to sign papers and go home. I eventually fell into a restless sleep. The image of that handprint on a young girl's face burned into my mind. The next morning, I drove out to the farm. Darlene was right. You couldn't miss it. The lightning-scarred oak tree stood like a gnarled old sentinel at the entrance to a long gravel driveway. The farmhouse itself was a simple, two-story wooden structure, its white paint peeling to reveal the gray, weathered wood beneath. It looked tired, sad, and forgotten. The fields around it were green and vibrant, tended by the tenant farmer. But this small plot of land around the house felt still. The air was heavy, quiet. Even the birds seemed to avoid the trees closest to the house. I met the estate agent, a man named Mr. Abernathy, a portly fellow with a sweaty brow and a forced, professional smile. He stayed in the driveway, refusing to get too close to the house. Everything's in order, Mr. Bell, he said, handing me a clipboard. Just sign here and here. The tenant farmer will continue his lease on the acreage. And this part of the property is yours to do with as you see fit. He glanced at the house, a look of distinct discomfort on his face. Most folks round here wouldn't set foot on it for all the money in the world. It's just an old house, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Some things are more than what they seem, he replied, not looking at me. He took the signed papers, got in his car, and left without another word, kicking up a cloud of dust. And then I was alone. Just me, the silent house, and the weight of 2 centuries of stories. For the first hour, I just walked the property. The sun was warm on my shoulders. A gentle breeze rustled the tall grass. It was almost peaceful. I found the supposed site of the original cabin, now just a slight, rectangular depression in the earth, marked by a simple, moss-covered stone. I walked down to a small, dark opening in a limestone outcrop near the river, the infamous Bell Witch Cave. A chain-link fence had been erected over the entrance, plastered with "No trespassing" signs. I stood there for a moment, feeling a draft of unnaturally cold air seep from the darkness within. It smelled of damp stone and something else, something faintly metallic and sour. Like old blood. I shook off the feeling and headed back to the farmhouse. My plan was simple. Do a quick walkthrough. Make sure it was structurally sound enough to not collapse on itself. Then head back to the motel, and leave this place behind forever in the morning. The front door was swollen in its frame, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. It groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the silent interior. The air inside was thick, musty, and cold, colder than it should have been. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in long, slanted shafts. The ground floor consisted of a small living room, a kitchen with a rusted iron stove, and a back pantry. Everything was covered in a thick shroud of dust. The only sounds were the creaking of the floorboards under my feet and the frantic beating of my own heart. This is the point in the story where things start to shift. It's the point where you cross a line. You can try to rationalize everything that came before, but you can't rationalize what comes next. This was my first red flag. As they say, the first sign that this wasn't just in my head, or in the pages of an old journal. I went upstairs. There were 2 small bedrooms. The first one was empty, save for a shattered mirror in the corner. The second one, at the end of the hall, was the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. As I pushed it open, a floorboard in the hallway behind me let out a loud, sharp creak. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. I knew that sound. I had just stepped on that exact spot not 10 seconds earlier. I waited, listening. The house was silent again. The kind of profound, absolute silence that feels heavy, like a blanket smothering all noise. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses do that. It was a wooden structure. Changes in temperature, humidity, a dozen logical explanations. My engineering brain was working overtime to reassure me. I stepped into the bedroom. A single, bare mattress lay on a rusty iron bed frame, its ticking stained and torn. A small wooden nightstand was next to it, and on that nightstand was my grandfather's journal. I stopped dead. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. Absolutely, unequivocally impossible. I had left the journal locked in the trunk of my car, which was parked 100 yards away down the driveway. I was certain of it. I have a checklist habit. I pat my pockets for my keys, phone, wallet, and I always double-check that my car is locked. There was no way. No one could have gotten into my car, taken the journal, entered this house, and placed it there without me seeing or hearing them. My first thought was Abernathy. Could he have a spare key? Slipped in while I was down by the cave? But why? What would be the point of such a bizarre, elaborate prank? It made no sense. I cautiously approached the nightstand. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the leather cover. It was real. It was the same journal. I opened it. It was flipped to a new page, one I hadn't read. The handwriting was the same archaic script of John Bell Jr. The entry was dated October 1820. The entity has grown bold. It no longer contents itself with whispers and torments of the flesh. It delights in a crueler game now, the manipulation of our minds. It moves objects when our backs are turned. Father's tobacco pouch appears on the mantelpiece moments after he set it on the table. Mother's sewing needles vanish from her basket and are found embedded in the soap. It is a constant, unnerving presence, a reminder that we have no privacy, no sanctuary. It knows our thoughts. Last night, as I prayed for deliverance, the whispering began from the rafters above me, mocking my silent words to God. It said, "No one can hear you, Johnny, no one but me." I felt a wave of nausea. No one but me. I looked around the dusty, Silent room. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague premonition, it was a suffocating certainty. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I grabbed the journal, slammed it shut, and turned to leave. I wasn't going to run. I was going to walk calmly out of this house, get in my car, and drive until Tennessee was a distant memory. But as I turned, I heard it from downstairs, a single, soft thump, like someone had set a boot down on the wooden floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the oppressive quiet. "Is anyone there, Mr. Abernathy?" Silence. Then, thump, a little closer this time. It was coming from the bottom of the staircase. Thump, thump, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Someone was walking up the stairs. My training, my logic, my entire worldview screamed that this was impossible. The front door was closed. All the windows were boarded up or painted shut. No one could be in the house. But my ears told me a different story. Thump, thump, creak. It was on the landing now, just outside the bedroom door. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall, my eyes wide, fixed on the doorway. I held my breath, straining to hear. The silence stretched for an eternity. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. And then, a whisper. It was right outside the door. A dry, sibilant, female whisper. It sounded ancient, filled with a rustling, dead leaf quality, and it whispered one word. Jake. That was it for me. The foundation of my rational world didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. How did it know my name? I hadn't said my name out loud since I left the motel. Abernathy had called me Mr. Bell. Primal fear took over. All thoughts of a calm exit vanished. I wasn't an engineer anymore. I was prey. My eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. There was only one window, and it was painted shut. The glass yellowed with age. The only way out was through that door, through whatever was standing on the other side. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an hour. The journal was clutched in my hand so tightly my knuckles were white. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was a waiting silence. A patient, predatory silence. Slowly, carefully, I forced myself to move, one step at a time. I crept towards the door. My shoes made no sound on the dusty floorboards. I reached the doorway, my body pressed against the frame, and peered around the edge, down the hallway. It was empty. Dust motes danced in the pale light. Nothing had been disturbed. There was no one there. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I was losing my mind. The story, the house, the isolation, it was all getting to me. I was hallucinating. That had to be it. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my logical brain desperately trying to reassert control. And that's when I heard the scratching. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the room with me. I spun around. The sound was coming from the wall behind the bed. The wall I had just been pressed against. It was a faint, rhythmic scratch, 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 the sound of fingernails dragging slowly through old plaster. I stared at the wall. A patch of peeling floral wallpaper. The scratching continued, moving slowly down the wall towards the floor. My mind was reeling. I was in a sealed room, and the sound was coming from inside the wall. Then the scratching stopped, and the whispering started again. This time it wasn't in the hall. It was in the room. It was everywhere at once. It was a chorus of dry, rustling whispers, coming from every corner, echoing in my skull. Get out? But it wasn't a simple command. It was drawn out, distorted. The G sound was a wet, gurgling sound, like the one John Bell Jr. had described. The T in get was a sharp, clicking noise. The out was a long, sighing moan that seemed to suck the very warmth from the air. GGG gurgle click. OWWWWWT. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted. I flew out of that bedroom, not even looking at the empty hallway. I vaulted down the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I felt a pressure, a cold, chasing presence at my back. It felt like I was running through deep water. I hit the ground floor and fumbled with the front door. The old wood was still swollen shut. For a terrifying second, it wouldn't budge. I threw my entire body weight against it, A scream of pure animal panic tearing from my throat. It burst open with a crack of splintering wood, and I stumbled out into the afternoon sun. The light was blinding. The air was warm. The birds were singing. It was as if I had stepped from a nightmare back into reality. I didn't stop. I sprinted down the gravel driveway, my lungs burning, the old journal still clutched in my hand. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I reached my car, my hands shaking so violently it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key in the ignition, and twisted. The engine sputtered and died. No, 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 I chanted, my voice trembling. I tried again. It sputtered, coughed, and fell silent. A new wave of cold fear washed over me. I looked in the rearview mirror. The farmhouse stood silent and still at the end of the driveway, its windows like vacant eyes. Nothing was moving, but I knew it was watching me. I took a deep breath. Think, Jake, think. I was an engineer. I understood engines. It was a 2018 model. Reliable. It had a full tank of gas. There was no reason for it not to start. Unless. I closed my eyes. The entity has grown bold. It delights in a crueler game now. I tried the ignition one more time. As I turned the key, I heard the whisper again. Not from outside. It was inside the car with me. A soft, clear, female voice, right next to my ear. I can do more than that. My eyes snapped open. The engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I slammed the car into reverse, spun around in a spray of gravel, and floored it. I flew down Red River Road, my eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. I drove until the town of Adams was gone, until the rolling hills of Robertson County flattened out, until the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple. I drove all night. I didn't stop for gas, for food, for anything. I just drove, fueled by adrenaline and a terror so profound it felt like it had permanently rewired my nervous system. I still had the journal on the passenger seat next to me. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could have sworn I saw the pages ruffle, as if turned by an unseen hand. I got back to my Chicago apartment just after dawn. I stumbled inside, locked the door, bolted it, and leaned against it, gasping for air as if I'd been holding my breath for 9 hours. I was home. I was safe. Concrete, steel, hundreds of miles away from that patch of cursed Tennessee soil. But the story doesn't end there. That's not how this works. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of my apartment building, every gust of wind against my window, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I kept the lights on all night. I started working from home because the thought of being in a crowded office, of having to pretend I was okay, was unbearable. I tried to tell my girlfriend, Sarah, what happened. I sat her down, the journal on the coffee table between us, and I told her everything. I watched her face shift from concern to confusion, and finally, to a kind of gentle pity. She thought I was having a breakdown, a reaction to my grandfather's death. She suggested grief counseling. She didn't believe me. I don't blame her. I wouldn't have believed me either. The haunting, I thought, had stayed in Tennessee, but the entity, Kate, whatever it is patient, and it's possessive. It told my ancestor, mine. I think it considers the whole family, hers. It started subtly, just like it did in the 1800s. Red flag. I was on a work call, a video conference with my team. We were discussing load-bearing calculations for a new bridge project. I was explaining a complex equation when my microphone suddenly cut out. I unmuted it. It immediately muted itself again. I checked the settings. Everything was fine. Then, through my headphones, I heard a faint, high-pitched sound. It sounded like feedback, but it wasn't. It was a whisper, a distorted, digital whisper, buried under layers of static. It took me a second to make it out. Wrong calculation? I froze. My colleague on the screen said, Jake, you there? You look like you've seen a ghost. I laughed it off, blamed a bad connection, and ended the call. I spent the next 4 hours obsessively rechecking my math. I didn't find any errors. But the seed of doubt was planted. A week later, I was asleep. It was around 3 a.m. I was jolted awake by a sharp, stinging pain on my leg. I threw back the covers and turned on the lamp. On my calf, there were 3 long, red scratches, welling up with tiny beads of blood. They were parallel, deep, as if a wild animal had clawed me. Sarah was asleep beside me, her breathing deep and even. The doors were locked, the windows were shut, nothing was in the room. The physical torment had begun. Just like with Betsy, small things. At first, my hair being tugged when no one was near. A sudden, violent shove from behind while I was walking down my hallway, sending me stumbling into the wall. And the cold, unexplained pockets of frigid air would appear in my apartment. I'd be sitting on the couch, and suddenly the spot next to me would be ice cold to the touch. The temperature dropping so fast I could see my breath. And it talks to me. Not in full conversations, just whispers, snippets. It knows things. It whispered Sarah's ex-boyfriend's name while we were watching a movie. It hummed the lullaby my mother used to sing to me. A song I haven't heard in 30 years and have never mentioned to anyone. It uses my technology against me. My smart speaker will activate on its own. Its blue light cycling, and a distorted, computerized voice will whisper a single word from across the room. Johnny. It calls me the name it called my ancestor. I have the journal locked in a safe now. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I can hear a faint scratching sound coming from inside the safe. I haven't been back to Tennessee. I sold the land, all of it, for a fraction of its worth to a holding company that didn't ask any questions. I just wanted it gone. But I know it doesn't matter. The location was never the source of the haunting. The house wasn't the problem. The cave wasn't the problem. We're the problem. My family, my bloodline. It's been over a year now. Sarah left. She couldn't handle it. The constant tension, my paranoia, the things she couldn't explain but could no longer deny, like the photograph of us that flew off the mantelpiece and shattered against the far wall while we were arguing. So now, it's just me, and her, this presence, this intelligent, malevolent thing that has attached itself to my family for 200 years. I'm telling this story not for fame, not for belief, but as a warning, and as a record. Just like John Bell Jr. did. Because I feel my health starting to fail. I have headaches that last for days. A constant, crushing fatigue. The doctors can't find anything wrong. But I know, I feel it wearing me down. Just like it did to John Bell Sr. The final entry in that journal is the most chilling. It was written by John Jr. after his father's death. The family found a strange vial with an unidentified dark liquid after he passed. They tested it on the cat. And the cat died almost instantly. They were certain he had been poisoned. John Jr. wrote, "As we stood by Father's grave, the voice came to us, not as a whisper, but as a loud, triumphant song from the empty air above our heads. It sang a crude and joyous tune about its victory. It has taken him from us. And I fear it will not rest until it has taken us all. I don't know what it wants from me. I don't know how to fight it. Every night when I go to sleep, I wonder if I'll wake up. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, and the city outside is asleep, I'll hear that whisper, as clear as if the person were standing right behind me. It's always the same thing. A promise, and a threat. Mine.